Yeah, just very quickly. For people who are really just out there thinking about what's happening with the economy and what's happening with the incoming Federal Reserve chairman now, Mr. Warsh, this is the most difficult situation anybody's walked into since Paul Volcker. We are probably 3 years away from the Paul Volcker situation. So to backtrack, 1960s, 1970s, we had the war on poverty. LBJ spent a lot of money on. We had the Vietnam War, and we did nothing really about it. So we had some inflation come in. Then in the 70s, they tried this wage and price control, being very rough with the numbers. Inflation subsided a little bit. A man named Burns, B-U-R-N-S, Arthur Burns, friends of President Nixon, he succumbed to all the political pressure, didn't do the right thing. Inflation roared. It was after the first OPEC shock and then so forth. In comes Paul Volcker. Paul Volcker, like a 6'7" giant guy, he caused 2 recessions. Not just the first one, when he took rates up to 20%. Inflation hit about, I guess, 18%. Of course, back then nobody wanted to buy bonds. It was the best thing you could have done. You could have bought 30-year treasuries and couponed off 18%. But you didn't. I mean, people didn't. They didn't want them. So today, think about it. Jerome Powell, who is much beloved by the press for some bizarre reason, he's the guy who he wanted inflation at 2%, not at 0. That's not price stability. That takes half of your money away, basically, over 35 years at 2% inflation. I know it sounds like a long time, but it's just stupid. Inflation should be 0. He's never hit it in 5 years. I mean, I wrote down some of the numbers, just so people know. In 2020, the CPI was 1.2%, so he was doing great. 2021, 4.7, 2022, 8%, 2023, 4.1, 2024, 3, 2025, 2.7. See, a lot like what happened in the early 70s. Inflation tapered off. Now it's zooming back up. The new guy in charge of the Fed has said many times that inflation is a choice and it's the job of the Federal Reserve. Yet, all the pressure from the White House is from the cut rates, and he's saying rates should be cut because of what's happening in the future regarding artificial intelligence that will bring prices down. Now listen, some of the inflation we're having is a temporary shock again. Temporary meaning over the course of the year because of the war in Iran and oil. But remember, once things get into the system and people start thinking they're there forever, it goes into union contracts. It goes into prices. These things don't come right back down. In fact, they never really come down. Inflation may come down, but prices aren't coming down. If you add in the effect of what's really happening between old people and young people, here's a statistic for you. It's 2019, and you make $100,000, you could buy a house. You have to make $150,000 now to buy a house, where prices are up 25%. Your wages probably didn't keep up with that for the most part. You're probably making 120, maybe making 118, because some people lost their jobs. I'm just saying, in general terms, this is why houses are unaffordable. You add into it the craziness of the administration. This guy, Dennis Hassett, he said several days ago, I watched him say it. So it's not like I'm just reading. I actually watched this clip because couldn't believe it. He said that as consumer credit hits 1.25 trillion, an all-time high, and people fall farther behind on their car payments. By the way, the average car payment is $680 a month. Does that sound okay to you? Like 40% of the car loans outstanding are now on 84 months. Does that sound okay to you? No one ever did over 5 years. Now they just keep pushing them out. He says it shows the economy's doing great because people are borrowing money on their credit card. The average credit card balance now is like $7,000. But of course, some people it's much worse, and people who are blessed, it's nothing. But what I'm saying is that all these things are happening at the same time. And yet, there's this Pollyanna version of what we're about to do, which is cut rates. You really have to follow the 2-year treasuries and see that even though the Fed has cut since September of 24, like 5 times, like 1.5 points down, that's only on short-term rates. When they first started cutting, the 10-year yield was 3.67. That's what went into your mortgage rate. It's what's based off, your 10-year treasuries. Usually a point or so higher than that. Let's say it was 3.67. Today it's like 4.5 or 4.45. I haven't looked at it even today. But so rates have gone higher. The 30-year bond is now above 5%. Well, right now, nobody cares. That's because these things take an enormous amount of time to feed through the system. In other words, if oil stays above $100 a barrel, and I don't know if it is or won't. I was long oil, and I'm not really anymore right now. I might be in 5 minutes. But what I'm saying is that people change the behavior. They can't change it the next day, especially with something that has such an inelastic demand. In other words, by inelastic demand, I mean the price doubles, but you still have to drive the car to work. You have the same car. 6 months from now, you may do remote work more. You may buy another car that gets 30 miles to the gallon versus your F-250 pickup like the one I drive that gets like 17 miles to the gallon and maybe 20 on the highway. I won't make the change because I just don't care. But people will make changes. And along the way, a lot of these changes for employers and so forth and the prices really impact people. Who do they impact the most? People in the middle class. Why not the poor people? They get welfare transfers, right? Why not people on Social Security as much? Although if you're only on Social Security, you're really in bad shape because it was a bad investment. But over time, people will have to make changes. But the people who get hurt the worst are the people in that true middle class. And depending on where they live, if they live in Pittsburgh, which is an inexpensive place to live compared to Palo Alto, California, let's say, they might be making family of two making 70 grand, consider themselves middle class. They bought a home a long time ago and they're making the mortgage payment and maybe they don't even have a mortgage. They live in New York City, they might have to make 200 grand, right? And they think middle class is like they got to get someone to take care of their children, even though they shouldn't. But anyway, that's my other point. But anyway, back to this. This is really, really tragic because all of this is happening as the debt, the national debt, is well above now the gross domestic product. There's never been a time when this has happened, combined with a time where one industry, remember back to the global crossing days in 1999, remember back to the invention of, the airplanes or whatever, where this AI thing is like 2 or 3% of the entire economy growth. 2% of the entire economy, and the growth of it is huge. My bet, by the way, and I don't know if I'm right, is that probably someone sends really cheap AI, probably China, because the president's over there now. One last point, I'm just going to make this. I've never seen anything more egregious than the president traveling with a bunch of industrial sycophants. He's on a plane again with the guy who runs Tesla. Don't they hate each other? Aren't they going to sue each other? I mean, the whole thing, didn't the guy who runs Tesla basically accuse the president of being a pedophile at one point? You have to understand, these people don't care. It's all about power. The guy who runs Apple Computers there, he doesn't want tariffs. He gives millions of dollars to the president's whatever. The ballroom, the disastrous ballroom. So all this stuff is actually happening. And over the next year, there's a real chance that it all really unwinds. I watched this happen, by the way. It's one of the reasons in 2000, I told Alan Morgan as I became president of the firm, I'm not going to run the focus list anymore. And the focus list did very, very well. In fact, I'll put up a copy of it below in the Substack. But I didn't want to have a bad year as the president of the firm because it'd be disastrous. So we had 5 really good years when I ran it and outperformed the market by a huge amount. But I felt like I wasn't going to do that every single year. I'm just a human being. And it was good that I stopped because I really thought the market was expensive. And if you remember, there was always something that makes these markets go down for a long period of time. In the year 2000 problem, as we entered into 2000 and the market peaked in March of the following year, because the year 2000 wasn't a problem, but it was like Dell Computer came out and said things along the lines of we're not selling many computers. Well, guess what? We all had to have new computers. It wasn't like a rotation of once every 4 years you might get a computer for the firm or for yourself. Everybody in the world, except for Albania, it looked like. Remember Albania? The clocks kept ticking and everything was fine. On January 1st, they did nothing and everything was fine. I never forget this as long as I live. But that was sort of the peak of the market. The NASDAQ didn't hit that peak again, I think, for 15 years. I'm doing this ad hoc, so you can correct me on some of the numbers. But the bond vigilantes, what we say are people who won't buy U.S. bonds, are actually here now. Rates are rising. Now, real rates versus what inflation is today versus what the 10-year bond yields is now are not that high. If you think inflation is running at 4% or so right now and the yield is 4.5%, they're actually extraordinarily low. They should be 2% above inflation. But there will be a day when they're 3 and 4% above inflation. And if you own an apartment building, how are you going to refinance it? If you have adjustable rate mortgages, what are you going to do? The people who really benefit are the older people. The people who are really struggling and are going to struggle further are the younger people. It would be great for them if the stock market actually collapsed and they were just buying ETFs, which no one should really buy. But anyway, that's a whole nother show I have to do about ETFs. But so much is in ETFs that it's just basically now about buying and selling. When everything turns computer-wise and people sell and then computers sell and so forth, it'll be like the crash of 1987, which was about a portfolio insurance and people just had to sell. And of course, we didn't have a recession then. We might have a recession over this now. But things are in a very precarious way. And the Fed chairman came in yesterday, I guess, and he's got a real choice to make. This is the summation of everything. Does Kevin Warsh want to do what I would do, be a couple of years before, cyclically before it gets really, really bad, to be Paul Volcker and tell Congress, I'm not paying for your stuff. We're not doing any more quantitative easing, which the Fed is doing right now, and he doesn't want to do, he says. We're not cutting rates. The 2-year Treasury yields 4%. We're going to raise rates a complete percentage point, and we're going to make sure that this actually ends, folks. And we're going to get inflation down to zero, whether the president of the United States wants a war or not. Because if they don't print the money, we'll have a massive recession. And listen, we should have a massive recession to cleanse the system. But what the Federal Reserve thinks, what Donald Trump thinks, what the people in Congress know, is that we can't. We can't have a recession because when the debt to GDP is not 6%, but 9%, the world ends effectively financially. God bless. Good luck.